Appreciate having this conversation. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your work with the homeless outreach team and law enforcement. I know that you've had many years as, one of the founding members of the homeless outreach team in Wichita, and gone across the country and talked to local police departments and national organizations about what you've done. And so,
Yeah.
really, let's just kind of start off with you talking about what's the hot team, the homeless outreach team, and what do you do, and a little bit of background on that.
So our homeless outreach team, started. I've been a police officer for 20 years, and when I've worked downtown my entire career, and so when I kept seeing a revolving door of the same homeless people we were arresting over and over again, and I come back to work the next day, we're arresting them again, and it's just a revolving cycle. And so I knew that we had to try something different, because what we're doing, trying to arrest your way out of homelessness, it wasn't working. So that's when I just started looking around the country. There's a new concept called police homeless outreach teams, and there was very few agencies that had them, and none in Kansas. So I reached out to an agency in Colorado, went and got training from them, brought back the idea, and then presented it to our chief. And so, that was a strange kind of new concept. I mean, our chief had been a chief at that point and been in law enforcement for 40 years. And so it's hard to try to convince someone that there's another way of doing policing. So it was a risk, because the concept of the police homeless outreach team is to focus not on arrests and tickets, and actually try to divert those minor charges in lieu of services and housing and get them off the streets. Because there was a study done by University of North Carolina, Charlotte, that showed if you can get a homeless person off the streets and into permanent transitional housing, you actually reduce their vagrancy arrest by 84%. So from a law enforcement perspective, if that's your goal and that's what you're trying to do for your community, why are we as police officers, first responders, trying to focus our energies more on getting them housed, and then that will, on its own, reduce those vagrancy arrests and issues by 84% in your community. So that's when I started it. I wrote a policy and procedure, wrote an ordinance and an SOP, and implemented that. When we went live, I started that in 2011, and we went live officially in 2013. So, and that's really, and we're a 4-man unit now. And that's really what our focus is focusing on decriminalizing homelessness, getting them into housing, getting them connected with services, whether it's mental health, substance abuse help, diverting those charges away from the court system if we can. There's non-victim type crimes in lieu of services. Since 2013, we've housed over 1,700 homeless, and reduced our chronic homeless population by 86%. And so that's really what's, the data and that information has really got the attention of Washington, D.C., and why I'm training other departments right now and a consultant for many federal agencies.
Yeah, because, what I think the first thing that people would say, and probably the pushback you maybe initially got in Wichita, is, hey, it's tough enough to have a budget to hire enough police officers to stay on the street and deal with 911 calls and deal with traffic accidents and all the stuff that's going on. And then on top of that, these days, you've got issues like, should we defund police? And so there's very limited resources for police officers, with more work than they can already handle. And so the question becomes, well, why should police officers be doing this work? You know why, and I know why, because I've talked to a lot of people that work for social service organizations, and the challenges of interfacing with homeless, which can be dangerous situations, and the complexities of understanding the law. But you've been doing this for 10 years, and you understand this much better than I do. So if you could talk about that a little bit, I think that would really enlighten people to why police officers should be a part of this, dealing with this issue.
Right. So I do presentations a lot of times, even to community members and church groups or whatever, and that it always comes up, like, why are the police involved in homeless outreach? Right? Doesn't that sound like social work? And although it does, if you think about it, if you're a citizen and you see homeless person, sleeping on your front porch of your business or whatever, who are you going to call? Like, you're automatically going to call 911, and they're going to dispatch a police officer. And that police officer has two options. He can arrest the guy for trespassing, or move him along, or he's already on scene. Maybe he takes that extra effort to get him referred to a social worker or get him connected to resources or a shelter, take it a little step further so that the next day when that business owner shows up and the guy's still there, you're not having this revolving door, this cycle. And that's what also people don't understand and realize. The other thing is the safety thing that you kind of hinted on. These social workers are not going to go underneath bridges. A lot of times they have policies that they can't go alone or go underneath the bridge. People have substance abuse issues and they have mental health issues. And then you're combining all that. They have weapons on them. Law enforcement, we're able to, deal with that because of our gear and our training and go into those situations or those abandoned buildings that the social workers can't go to. And I can tell you right now, we actually are partnering with social workers right now, and they're riding with us every so often, and we're working together as a team now, which is the model. But if you ask them, hey, should we get rid of police and just have you guys go to the intoxicated individual screaming in the middle of downtown, and you guys just want to go handle that, they would say absolutely not. That's ridiculous. So they're not even in favor of defunding the police. And here's the thing. When I train other departments, you have some cities that are one side and they have other side that are on the other side and the perspective. And what I mean by that is some agencies, police departments go in there and they just want to make arrests and arrest all the homeless people and put them in jail. And I can tell you from legality issues, that often has them end up in court for civil lawsuits and those type of things. We can talk about that later.
Yeah.
The other end of the spectrum is the city says, you know what? We're not going to do anything. We're going to tell the police that not to address homeless issues. And if you get a homeless call, you don't go out to it. If someone sets a tent up in front of a business or apartment complex, they're allowed to do it. And we're not going to address it and do anything. And so then you end up having tent cities and places, like San Francisco and Portland, where their downtowns are just on the sidewalks are tents up 10 up 10. So there's a happy medium there. And I think the law enforcement has to be involved, but you can't necessarily go, too far right where you're just arresting them and violating their rights. And there has to be some humanity there. And there has to be a balance. So that's kind of what I like to train at agencies on.
Well, let's talk about that legality point, because that's so important. Because I, living in Wichita, then moving to Denver, and now living in California, and I traveled across the country when I first left Wichita and did a cross-country trip then, and I saw so much difference in the way cities try to deal with homelessness. And, city after city, there's always ordinances coming up for votes on cities. And on one side, you have people saying, anybody should be able to stay anywhere they want. We're violating their rights if you try to tell them to leave. But then there's people that have homes and businesses and say, why are these people allowed to stay on the sidewalk in front of my home, and why can't the police just get them out of here? And it's a very complicated issue that's made its way to the Supreme Court, and most people don't know about these legalities of it. So if you could talk a little bit about, the legislation, legalities, and why being an informed person that works in law enforcement is valuable, I think that would help people understand better the complexities of the issue.
Right. So, basically what the Supreme Court has come down and said in multiple cases in different jurisdiction is that, you don't want to criminalize homelessness, which I think we can all agree with that. If someone doesn't have a place to go, shelter, home, or wherever to live, then they have a legal right from civil rights to be able to set up a tent and live and exist. One judge ruled that they called it self-sustaining activities. Mm-hmm. So when you life-sustaining activities, so if you can't criminalize that, but there also has to be a catch, like what you just said. I mean, you can't. Other people have civil rights too. The business owners have civil rights. The property owners have civil rights as well. So we can't negate that. So where does that balance happen? And the test is for having like something like a camping ordinance to be able to enforce it. The test is you just have to be able to prove that you have shelter space available for that person, and then you have to give a warning and give a referral to them, and then give them the opportunity to accept that shelter or leave or stop the camping. And that's why law enforcement is very valuable because a social worker wouldn't be able to enforce a camping ordinance. They would, and we proved it. We spent a summer one time prior to a hot team where we met with all the social workers and we'd have meetings like this, and we would say, hey, we have a bunch of homeless are camping out in our city library. Can you go help them and have them stop doing that? And they would go, and the individuals say, no, I'm good. I just want to sit here and keep drinking beer all day. And then they leave and they report back and say, well, we can't do anything because they told us they didn't want our help. So that's why law enforcement is important. But we do have to be involved. There's times when, everyone has civil rights, the homeless person plus the business owner, the citizen, and there has to be a balance there. And the balance is just we have to legally prove that there's shelter space available. And that's where it does become tough for some cities. I mean, if their city doesn't have enough shelter space or they're full, then by law, that person can legally camp outside. So maybe, the conversation needs to be directed more towards, cities getting involved in housing opportunities like your initiative. Or shelters and those type of things, and that's probably where the discussion needs to probably start focusing on, because we know what the legalities are in regards to addressing it.
So to summarize, because we've talked about this many times before, so you've really helped educate me on the legalities. So let me kind of summarize for everybody watching and for myself. The Supreme Court's heard multiple cases, and the Supreme Court has ultimately decided, hey, here's the situation. You can't criminalize somebody for trying to live and survive if they have nowhere to go. So if they're in a public space, and most people don't realize that space between the curb and the sidewalk, there's an easement there, which is where utilities run through. That's public space. That's why people are in tents in front of businesses, because that space just beyond the inside of the curb is public space. Now, if somebody's there camping in a tent or sleeping on the sidewalk or sleeping on a bench, if a police officer gets a call and somebody says, I want this person out of here, they're in front of my business, what the law says is you can go to that person and say, hey, do you need a place to stay? And if there are shelter spaces available in the city where that person can go stay and get help, then you can say, you need to go there. You can't live here in front of this business or in this public space because we have space for you. The city's created shelter space for you. If that person says, no, I won't, I don't want to, I've been to those shelters before, they make me stop drinking and I don't want to stop drinking, or whatever issue they may have that they don't like shelters, but the shelter space is available, then you say, okay, well, you've got 48 hours to get out of here because we're going to start the clock ticking now. I can't just make you move now, but I'm coming back to check on you. So I'm going to give you enough time to leave. The Supreme Court said that. Give these people time to move on. Don't just arrest them. And I think that's where people get confused because they say, well, I called the police because somebody's sleeping in a tent on the sidewalk in front of my building. They came, they talked to the guy and left and didn't do anything. Why didn't they do anything? Well, their hands are tied because the Supreme Court, the law of the land says the police can do something, but you've got to be humane and give those people time to adjust and get out of there if they don't want help, or go to a shelter if they do want help. And back to your point, a lot of problems cities have is people say, why do we have so many people in tents and sleeping in public and living homeless? And part of that conversation has to be about the fact that communities need to put more resources into shelters and spaces for the people to go. Because I know in Wichita is a smaller town. It's a big, small city. It's got almost 500,000 people with all the surrounding communities. So it's not small, but it still has limited resources. And at certain times throughout the year, there's not enough shelter space. And there's not enough shelter space for certain types of people. Like there's men's space, which is kind of the most common because men are the most common on homeless people, but there's not enough for women and families. That's the tough part. And so a community, if they really want to solve this homeless issue, needs to look first at how do we make sure we have enough space for everybody, because the law does say police can do something about it if you have enough space. And so yeah. I just want to kind of recap that for everybody, and you tell me if I got it wrong, but I think that's what you're trying to help us see from a law enforcement standpoint. And then just to kind of go on a tangent, because this is something you and I've worked on in the past in Wichita. Homelessness isn't just about where people are sleeping. It's not just about where they have their cart full of goods or their tent. It's also about how they're trying to pay their bills. And so I know panhandling is a big issue in a lot of cities, and something you and I worked on with the city of Wichita when I lived there. And so I know it's got to be a big issue for everybody everywhere when they stop at a stoplight and there's constantly people with signs saying anything helps. Could you talk a little bit about that as a phenomenon, kind of, the legality and dealing with that as a law enforcement officer?
Right. So even when I first started our homeless outreach team, we actually had a panhandling law, meaning you couldn't hold a sign up on the side of the street or ask someone for money. It was illegal. It had been like that for decades. Around, I want to say 2017 or so, the Supreme Court came down and said that panhandling is a First Amendment right.
Mm-hmm.
So someone can hold a sign that, says anything helps or I need food or whatever. And that's a First Amendment right. And I'll be honest with you, I agree with that stance. It's just a sign. So how can you, criminalize someone who's, has a First Amendment right? I have a First Amendment right to walk up to someone and ask for money. I have a right to walk up to them and say, vote for this politician or vote for that politician, right? So, and I get that. So we end up having to get rid of our panhandling ordinances because of that law that came down from the Supreme Court. Now, what we did is we also made it a traffic violation. We changed it and said you can't step out into traffic and stop vehicles and do a transaction through a window. There's safety issues. We actually had a panhandler get killed in an accident because he was in the roadway and got ran over. So those are safety issues. But outside of that, if someone walks up to you on public property on a sidewalk and asks for money, that's a First Amendment right. And I do agree with that. So here's the thing. People always ask then, should we give money to, homeless? Well, there's a study done years ago, and they interviewed hundreds of panhandlers. And what they found out was 93% of all the money this is what they admitted to, by the way. 93% of their money went to drugs, alcohol, and tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we know about our homeless population, and one of the major things that they deal with is addictions and trying to get over that and get them the help that they need, when you're giving them money, and we know from the studies that they can get free food at places, the soup kitchens, they can get free shelter, free clothing, free everything, honestly. They can get free cell phones now. So when you're giving them money, where is that money going? It's to the things that they can't get for free, which, as the study shows, 93% of the time, it's going towards drugs, alcohol, and tobacco. So what you're doing is you're sustaining their addictions and enabling them and making their homeless problem even worse. So if you care about them so much, stop giving the things that are hurting them. It's kind of like someone was suicidal, and they said, "I'm really depressed. I want to kill myself. Can you give me a gun?" And he went, "You want a gun? Well, if you want a gun, I want to make you happy. So here you go."
Right.
That's insanity. And so we have to stop and break that cycle and stop and help us as a homeless outreach team with all the work that we've done with these individuals and helping them get off their addictions. You're just ruining all that work that we're doing and trying to get them, back to a lifestyle that they had before the drugs and alcohol and everything.
Man, that's a really good point, because I know a lot of people, myself included, and probably you before you came across this research, can pull up to a light and feel a little guilty about not helping the guy out that says veteran, need help, or homeless, anything helps at all. And a lot of people will hand out $1 or $5 and try to help that person, but knowing the statistics and understanding that where that money goes, and that you're enabling that person and their vices and the things that are hurting them, is valuable information, because it can just empower people to say, I'm not going to feel guilty. In fact, if I do feel guilty because I see homeless and they're panhandling, I should go home and get online and find out how I give to the United Way, or I should look up the organizations in my community that help the homeless and give to them, because they're the ones I know that when the money goes to them, they're going to help that individual. So I think that's incredibly valuable information. And also, you pointed out, again, the complexities of dealing with homelessness as a personal right to be places and say things. The First Amendment right to freedom of speech means that we can stand on the corner and shout our beliefs about anything we want, or hold a sign saying we need money, and we shouldn't encroach on that incredibly valuable First Amendment right, the first right put into our Constitution.
Right.
But at the same time, we need to understand, how what that money is being used for when it comes to panhandling, and how complex the law is. And that's why I think your message is so great about why law enforcement should be on the front lines of this and be directly involved with the social workers and with the community addressing this issue. And I know you've got a lot of experience over these years doing this. And I heard you told me recently you put that experience into a book, which I think is incredible, because you do have so much unique experience over such a long period of time. So would you mind talking a little bit about that book and what's in it and what you'd like to tell people?
Right. Oh, thanks for bringing that up. Well, the name of the book is Rooster: What a Homeless Man Taught a Cop. It's currently not out right now. I've submitted queries to agents, so with Trident and some other media groups, but I'm hoping it'll be out soon. But really, it's a journey of talks about a journey of me as a police officer, learning the lessons that I'd learned about homelessness, and that, what, they're all not just a bunch of lazy bums on the streets. They were somebody before they became homeless, and it's all about my journey, learning that, and then helping them through getting off the streets and into housing. I give lots of examples. Homeless female under bridge who her cat basically saved her, and then we were able to save her and get her off the streets, and she'd been under that bridge for 2 years, and not a single time a social worker came up and helped her, and we got her into a housing program too. An ex-police officer, 9-year veteran police officer who becomes disabled and ends up being homeless on the streets. And I ended up having to help him and get him off the streets and back into housing. And then the story ultimately is about Rooster, which is a 20-year homeless man, chronically homeless, raging alcoholic. And we ended up helping him getting clean and sober into a housing program. And now he lives on his own and works a full-time job. And now he's back to, his life that he used to have. But the book's ultimately about forgiveness. My father died of alcoholism when I was younger. And, I kind of, probably not all of us brothers, we were kind of always upset with him that how could he do this? How could he leave his family and, go to the bottle and then ultimately die and leave us? Rooster also, became an alcoholic, and he lost his children when he was younger. And so the kids went to foster care. And so the whole time when I would meet with him, he never really wanted to talk about it. Well, eventually, after we got him housed and got him clean and sober, he opened up and talked about his depression and regret for what he had done. And it ate at him for years and years and years. And that's why he was homeless and went to the bottle. His story ultimately ended up in the newspaper, and how we helped him and got housed. And his daughter, when she got taken when she was probably 5 years old, she saw the article, and she was a medical doctor at the University of Kansas, and saw the article and reached out to the newspaper, and then reconnected with Rooster. And so now she's forgiven him and he's forgiven himself. And ultimately, the book, obviously it's about our homeless outreach team and all the stuff that we've done to help, but ultimately it's about forgiveness and, me learning to forgive my father for what he had done, and then Rooster forgiving himself. And through that, that friendship that we had. So it's a pretty cool story.
That's awesome. Tell us the name of the book again.
Rooster: What a Homeless Man Taught a Cop.
Great.
So it's not out yet, but it will be. So
we'll be looking for it on Amazon and other places. And when it gets out, let me know, and I'll definitely tell everybody I know about it being out there, because it's nice that not only can you share your experience in law enforcement and working with homeless through the homeless outreach team, but to tell those success stories about the positive outcomes and personalize that with real people that you've seen and met and experienced life with. So I really look forward to that. So, well, I appreciate the time. Anything else you want to go over before we wrap this up?
I don't think so, unless you got any other questions.
I'm good. Just need more coffee, man. I appreciate again you doing this early first thing in the morning. So it's good to see you, man. It's been a while since I've been back in Wichita, but I look forward to getting back and connecting with you and the rest of the homeless outreach team when I do. But in the meantime, be safe and keep doing the good work that you do, man. It's much appreciated, and the work you do is incredibly valuable. So thanks, Officer Nate.
Well, thanks.
Officer Nate,
thank you too
for your help. Yeah.
Thank you, because you're still involved, and I know you're serious. Like you left Wichita, and now here you are. You're still trying to deal with the housing issue and the crisis, and we know it continues to be talked about and more of a crisis housing issue. And I think it's awesome to have people like you that are still involved and pushing forward with that. So can't wait to continue to partner with you. That's awesome.
Well, I appreciate that. I value our friendship, and I look forward to it continuing in the future. So thanks again.
All right. Awesome.
All right.
All right. See you, Jason.
See you.